Sheikh Hamdan stood beneath a trembling sky. His smile, once bright, now softened into a sigh. The crescent moon dimmed as if it felt his pain, for even the stars grieved when his light began to wane. The night whispered secrets no dawn could erase. Shadows slowly gathered around his face. The desert wind trembled, unsure of its flight, asking why his smile had faded into night. Once his laughter floated like falcons in the air, now silence followed him everywhere. Even horses paused in their gentle stride, feeling a sorrow he tried to hide. Dubai's golden towers held their breath, afraid of the silence that felt like death. For who is the city without its moon? Without the prince who lit every dune? He walked alone where palm trees swayed, remembering promises he once made. Memories pressed him like 1,000 suns, burning softly though the day was done. His smile had been a bridge for hearts, a lantern guiding broken parts. But now the lantern flickered low, for reasons only the night could know. People wondered why his eyes looked dim, why every joy seemed far from him, why storms gathered in a heaven so clear, why grief chose him to disappear. The silence around him learned to speak, telling stories of a heart gone weak, of a prince whose heart had taken flight, wandering alone through endless night. The night stretched its arms toward him, as if trying to hold the pieces of his fading warmth. Even the ocean, bold and restless, softened its waves when he walked by the shore, afraid to disturb the quiet sorrow wrapped around him. He looked at the horizon the way a poet looks at a dying flame, hoping it might rise again. Yet knowing some lights return only after a long winter, his heart was a map of unspoken stories, lines drawn by memories too heavy to carry, yet too precious to let go. Every footstep echoed like distant thunder, reminding him of days when joy followed him like a loyal shadow. Now the shadow walked ahead of him, cold, unfamiliar, and untouchable. He paused beneath a silent palm, feeling the weight of every unshed tear, caught somewhere between his breath and his destiny. The night wrapped him gently, as if whispering, "You don't have to be strong tonight." But he was a prince, a moon for his people, a heartbeat for a land that adored him. And yet even moons dim, even heartbeats stumble. When love leaves or memories ache, he touched his own chest as if searching for the lost place where his smile used to bloom. But the place felt quiet now, as if someone had closed a door and taken the sunlight with them. He looked toward the city lights, each one a reminder of moments he once cherished. But the lights felt distant, like fallen stars scattered across a forgotten sky. Still he walked, slowly, purposefully, as if moving might heal the silence, as if breathing might bring back the warmth that once lived so easily within him. The night followed him like a loyal companion, but even loyalty felt fragile, for grief has a way of making everything shiver, and in the deep stillness of the desert, he whispered a prayer only the wind heard, a prayer for strength, for clarity, and for the return of a smile that once shone brighter than dawn itself. The desert stars blinked uncertainly above him, as if they too were searching for the glow that once lived so effortlessly in his eyes. They remembered him, the way he smiled with a sincerity that made even the sky bend closer, the way joy followed him like an obedient falcon. But tonight, joy was nowhere to be found. It hid behind clouds of memory, heavy and unyielding. The stars flickered softly, as though calling out to him, "Come back to us. Come back to your light." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cool wind sweep across his face. The wind carried whispers of old laughter, echoes of days when the world felt light, when even sorrow bowed before his courage. But now those echoes sounded like ghosts of a distant life. He walked beside the quiet sea, watching silver reflections tremble upon the waves. The sea had always admired him, his strength, his kindness, his heart so vast it rivaled the horizon. Yet even the sea felt powerless tonight, unable to wash away the ache hidden so deeply within him. Every step he took felt like a conversation between him and the unseen shadows of his heart. Questions rose like dust in the desert air. Questions of loss, of fate, of what a prince must carry, even when no one is watching. He was a man loved by millions, yet tonight he felt like a lonely traveler, lost between yesterday's light and tomorrow's uncertainty. He lifted his gaze to the moon, hoping for guidance, but even the moon seemed shy, half hidden behind veils of drifting clouds. It felt as if the universe itself was grieving with him, sharing the burden he could not speak of. He whispered into the wind, a voice soft as a falling feather. I remember. I still remember. But memory was a blade. It glimmered with beauty, yet cut so painfully, whenever he dared to touch it. The night deepened around him, yet its darkness was gentle, almost protective, as if saying, You don't have to pretend here. Let the silence carry what your smile used to hide. He took a breath, a long, trembling breath, and for a moment, even time seemed to pause, waiting for him to find strength in the place where sorrow and hope collide. The night unfolded softly around him, like a vast velvet curtain closing upon an old dream. Every sound grew gentle. The whisper of palm leaves, the distant hum of the city, the quiet thrum of his own heartbeat. It was as though the world did not wish to disturb the heaviness he carried. He moved toward the stables, a place where his heart often found rest. Horses lifted their heads at the sound of his steps, their eyes filled with instinctive understanding. They sensed the tremor in his silence, the dimming warmth in his gaze. Even their breaths softened, as if offering him a moment of wordless comfort. He reached out and touched one of them, a loyal companion that had ridden with him through victories and storms. The horse pressed its head gently into his chest, reminding him of a time when his smile was enough to lift the world. But tonight the weight of memory pulled him inward. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something he could not name, a grief with no shape, a sorrow with no beginning or end. He leaned against the wooden stall, letting the familiar scent of hay and earth wrap around him. These were the small things that once kept his spirit steady, the ordinary moments that felt like home. Yet even here, a shadow clung to him. It was not the shadow of fear, nor guilt, nor weakness. It was the shadow of loss, the kind that arrives quietly, sits beside you, and refuses to leave. He remembered how easily he once believed that smiles were endless, that hearts did not crack under the weight of devotion. But life had whispered a different truth, one he learned only through the ache beneath his ribs. He stepped outside again, letting the cool night air touch the edges of his pain. The stars glittered faintly, but their distance felt immense. He wondered if light always had to fade before another could rise, if sorrow was the necessary bridge between the smile he lost and the strength he would one day regain. The wind shifted, bringing with it a faint memory of laughter he once knew well, a voice he once cherished deeply. He closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. Not to forget, not to heal, but simply to feel what had been taken away. In that moment, the night seemed to kneel before him, holding his sorrow with gentle hands, waiting for him to breathe again, without breaking. He walked toward the quiet dunes. Their golden curves now turned silver, under the shy glow of the moon. Each step he took sank softly into the sand, as though the earth wished to hold him gently, to keep him from drifting too far into the world of his own thoughts. The desert had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where truth echoed clearly, where the heart spoke without fear. Tonight it felt like a cathedral of silence, vast, sacred, and unbroken. He sat upon a lonely rise of sand, letting the stillness wrap around him. Like a cloak woven from forgotten dreams, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of ancient winds that had traveled across centuries to reach him in this single moment. He gazed at the horizon, that endless line between night and destiny. How many times had he chased the sun here? How many mornings had he greeted with laughter, believing that joy would never leave his side? Now the horizon seemed distant, as though it belonged to someone else. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the quiet ache pulsing beneath his palm, an ache shaped like a name, a memory, a promise that time could never erase. He whispered into the desert, a voice barely louder than the shifting sand. I miss what made my smile real. The words vanished instantly, absorbed by the vastness around him. Yet somehow the desert heard, and the dunes leaned closer, as if to comfort him. He tilted his head back, letting the stars watch him. They shimmered with a timid glow, as though unsure how to shine. When the man who once brightened the world sat wrapped in sorrow, he remembered the days when he smiled without thinking, when joy was a companion that lived beside him like breath. He remembered laughter shared at dawn, hands held beside the sea, soft words exchanged in confidence, dreams whispered like secrets beneath the warm Arabian sky. But nights like this reminded him that even princes bleed in places unseen, that hearts do not wear crowns, and that loss can steal the light from even the brightest soul. A small breeze swept across the dunes, lifting grains of sand into the air. Like tiny golden prayers, they swirled around him, soft, weightless, as though trying to fill the emptiness that lingered where his smile once lived. He closed his eyes, willing himself to breathe, not for the world, not for the expectations placed upon him, but for the boy still living inside the prince, the one who longed for warmth, for peace, for a single moment untouched by sorrow. And as he sat there, the night grew darker, yet somehow gentler, cradling his grief as though promising that even a faded smile can someday find its way back to light. The night deepened around him, as though it wished to wrap its arms more tightly across his shoulders, shielding him from the weight, pressing gently but relentlessly upon his heart. He rose slowly from the dune, brushing the soft sand from his hands, feeling the desert's warmth fade as a cool breeze drifted over him. It carried with it a melancholy hum, a sound so faint it could have been the echo of his own quiet longing. He walked along the ridge, watching his shadow stretch and shrink with every hesitant step he took. Once his shadow had danced with him, lively, fearless, reflecting a man whose spirit was bright enough to guide others. But tonight, even his shadow seemed to move cautiously, afraid of deepening the darkness already lingering within him. He paused again, allowing the desert silence to seep into every corner of his thoughts. Silence had become his unspoken companion, patient, unwavering, a listener to confessions. He had no courage to speak aloud. He remembered a smile, not his, but the one that once brought light into every room he entered, a smile that warmed him more deeply than the sun itself, a smile that now lived only in the fragile halls of memory, echoing softly whenever he allowed himself to breathe too deeply. Why did the heart cling to what it had already lost? Why do memories bloom in the very places that hurt the most? These questions pressed gently against the walls of his chest, like birds fluttering against a window they could not escape. He lowered his gaze to the sand, drawing absent circles with the toe of his shoe, circles that broke apart each time the breeze passed over them. He wondered if this was what grief truly was, a pattern you keep tracing, only to watch it scatter again and again. The desert felt endless, but his loneliness felt deeper still. He had people who loved him, a world that adored him, yet sometimes a single absence outweighed 1,000 presences. Sometimes the heart chose to break quietly, in the middle of a crowd, and no one could hear it. He lifted his head finally, letting the wind brush past his face, as though sweeping away even a little of his heaviness. He whispered into the night, "I will find my way, even if the path is dark." And though the night could not answer him, it seemed to listen, holding his words carefully, as though promising to keep them safe, until his smile found its way back to the dawn. He wandered farther into the quiet night, letting the path unfold beneath his feet, like a story he had no choice but to read. The moon followed him timidly, its light soft and uncertain, as though afraid to touch the sorrow resting so delicately upon his shoulders. He approached a small oasis, a place he had visited many times. With a lighter heart, the water shimmered, like a broken mirror of the sky, reflecting stars that flickered, as though trembling with empathy. He knelt beside the water, cupping a handful in his palm. It felt cool against his skin, a fleeting comfort to the warmth of grief inside him. He let the droplets slip through his fingers, like moments, those precious, fragile moments. That time always steals too quickly. A quiet sigh escaped him, one he hadn't meant to release. But the oasis heard it, and the reeds bent gently, as if bowing to his pain. He looked at his own reflection, the faint, wavering image of a man who once carried the sun in the curve of his smile. Now that smile seemed like a distant heartbeat, felt but no longer seen. He touched the water lightly, distorting his reflection. erasing the sad eyes staring back at him, eyes that had learned how to hide storms behind calm exteriors. He closed them, letting the sounds of the night draw closer. A memory surfaced, uninvited yet tender. A soft voice calling his name, a hand resting gently in his, a laughter that shaped the colors of entire seasons. He froze for a moment, caught between the ache of remembering and the fear of forgetting. He whispered to the water, almost too quietly, "I still carry you with me." The night accepted his truth, without judgment, letting it fall into the silence, like rain into the desert sand. He stood again, the breeze brushing against him, as though encouraging him to move, to keep walking, to keep breathing, even when every breath felt heavy. He obeyed, not because he felt strong, but because he had always known that strength sometimes means simply taking one more step. The trees surrounding the oasis rustled gently, their leaves shimmering under the faint moonlight. They seemed to whisper blessings, small, fragile, but sincere, hoping he might feel even the smallest spark of comfort. And as he walked away, the water behind him stilled, holding the echo of his sorrow in its quiet embrace, as though promising to guard the pieces of his heart until the night grew kinder. The wind carried him across the dunes, softly, patiently, like a hand guiding him through the heaviness of his own thoughts. He felt the sand shift beneath his feet, each grain a reminder that even small things endure through time and silence. He paused atop a high dune, gazing out at the desert stretching endlessly. The horizon blended with the night, dark and unbroken, and he felt both lost and found. Within its infinite stillness, memories returned, not with force, but with gentle persistence. Flickers of laughter, the brush of a hand against his, the warmth of trust and love he had once carried without fear. Now those memories felt fragile, like embers struggling against the wind of solitude. He thought of the people who loved him, who looked up to him as a guide, and yet he knew that no one could hold the weight of sorrow he felt alone. It was his alone to carry, to understand, to breathe with, and to navigate through the darkness that had claimed his smile. The moon rose higher, casting silver threads across the dunes. He traced them with his gaze, searching for a path, any sign that the light he had lost might one day return. It felt distant, like a song remembered, but never fully heard. He whispered into the wind, a prayer not for others, but for himself, for the quiet part of him that still hoped, that still believed, that even the deepest night could not claim the heart forever. The dunes seemed to breathe with him, rising and falling with the rhythm of his thoughts. Every grain held a story, every shadow a memory, and the desert became a mirror, reflecting not just his grief, but the strength buried beneath it. He knelt and let his hands touch the sand, feeling its cool embrace, its unspoken patience. It reminded him that endurance exists in quiet ways, that even when smiles fade, the heart remains capable of light, waiting for a moment to return to its own brilliance. A distant owl hooted, a single voice piercing the calm. It felt like a companion, a witness to his journey through night, and he realized that even in silence, he was not entirely alone. He took a deep breath, letting the desert hold him close, and for a fleeting moment, he imagined the return of warmth, the soft curve of a smile that might one day find its way back through the shadows that had claimed the night. The night felt endless yet not oppressive. It held him gently, as if the darkness itself had learned how to soothe a weary heart. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of palm leaves seemed to echo the quiet rhythm of his thoughts, a steady reminder that he was still here, still moving, still breathing. He wandered to a small ridge, the dunes rolling beneath him like soft waves. From this height, the city lights glimmered faintly in the distance, tiny points of warmth in a vast expanse of night. He thought of those lights as stories, stories of people who loved him, who believed in his strength, and who waited quietly for him to rise again. The memory of laughter brushed his mind, a sound both comforting and cruel. It reminded him of what he had lost, but also of what he could find if he allowed himself to hope. Hope was fragile, yes, but it was still alive, even when the smile that carried it had faded from his face. He knelt, letting his hands brush the cool sand, feeling the grainy texture as if it were a lifeline. Every ridge and curve seemed to speak to him, in the language of endurance, a silent counsel that whispered, "Even in darkness you can walk. Even in sorrow you can breathe. Even in night light remains." He closed his eyes and let the memory of warmth fill the spaces grief had hollowed out. A soft breeze kissed his cheek, and for the first time in hours, he imagined the possibility of a smile returning, not forced, not fleeting, but the quiet kind that grows from resilience and the patience of the heart. The desert stretched before him, timeless, patient, unwavering. It was both a mirror and a teacher, showing him that even vast emptiness could hold meaning, that even silence could speak of survival and hope. He whispered into the night, a vow not to anyone but himself. "I will walk through this darkness. I will find my way back to the light. I will let the stars remind me that I am more than my sorrow." A lone hawk glided overhead, its wings catching the faint glow of the moon. It reminded him of freedom, of flight, of the courage it takes to rise, even when the sky feels heavy and infinite. He rose from the sand, feeling the soft crunch beneath his feet. The night had not lifted his grief, but it had cradled it, given it a shape he could hold, and in that quiet acceptance, he found the first trace of strength returning to a heart long shadowed. He continued walking through the dunes, each step carrying both heaviness and resolve. The night was his companion, a vast expanse of shadow and quiet understanding. It did not demand that he smile, nor did it question the ache weighing his chest. It simply held him, a patient witness to the prince who had lost his light. The moon had climbed higher, casting pale silver across the sand. Its glow felt fragile, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. He paused, letting the cool touch of moonlight brush his face and hands, and for a brief moment, he felt as if the world had exhaled with him. He thought of laughter once shared, of hands held in trust, of words spoken softly in the quiet of dawn. Each memory was a flame, small but persistent, refusing to be entirely extinguished. By the night's sorrow, he knelt beside a wind-shaped dune, tracing its curves with his fingers. The sand slipped easily, yet it was a reminder that even what seems transient holds a quiet permanence. Perhaps he too could endure, even as his smile had faded, even as the world seemed heavy, and silence stretched endlessly before him. The desert was alive with subtle sounds, the distant rustle of a palm leaf, the faint sigh of wind across the ridges, the soft shifting of sand beneath invisible feet. Each sound spoke of continuity, of life persisting even when hearts ache, of time moving steadily forward, without hurry, without judgment. He lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the sky touched the dunes in a seamless blend of dark. It was both beautiful and humbling, a reminder that even in the deepest night, light exists somewhere beyond the line of sight. Perhaps it was not time for his smile to return, yet the seed of it lingered quietly in the chambers of his heart, waiting for patience to nurture it again. He let himself breathe slowly, inhale and exhale as if the rhythm could heal. What the heart feared to speak aloud, he whispered softly into the night. "I will carry this until I can smile again. I will endure until the dawn finds me ready." A distant hawk called, its solitary cry echoing across the dunes. It was a sound both mournful and brave, a reminder that life moves forward, that courage persists, that even in darkness there is song. He rose, shoulders squared against the night, feeling the first tentative stirrings of resolve. His smile had not returned, but perhaps that was not the point. Perhaps the journey through shadow, through grief, through silence, was teaching him how to carry his light once more, not for the world, but for himself. He walked on, the dunes stretching endlessly before him, their silvered curves reflecting the pale moonlight. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if the earth beneath his feet knew the weight of his heart, and wished to ease it, if only slightly. He thought of those who loved him, of the countless eyes that looked to him for hope, and yet he understood that strength was not always a bright expression, not always a laugh or a gesture, but often a quiet endurance that no one witnessed but himself. A solitary palm bent gently in the night breeze, its leaves brushing together in soft whispers. He imagined they were speaking to him, telling him that sorrow is not weakness, that even the deepest shadow holds the potential for dawn. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant flowers, subtle and fleeting but enough to remind him of life beyond grief. He inhaled deeply, letting the aroma fill the empty spaces left by memory and loss. He paused atop a ridge, gazing down at the rippling sands below. The shadows played in quiet patterns, like the soft murmur of unspoken thoughts. He realized that his smile had faded. Yes, but it had left traces, echoes of warmth that still lingered in the hearts he had touched. The night seemed to press closer, embracing him without question or demand. He let himself sink into it, feeling the hush of the desert wrap around him like a familiar cloak. Even pain could be gentle, he thought, if one allowed it to teach rather than consume. His mind wandered to fleeting laughter, to hands held in moments of quiet intimacy, to voices that had whispered comfort in the early hours of dawn. The memories were bittersweet, yet he held them like fragile gems, for they reminded him that love and joy had existed and could exist again. A distant owl called softly, its echo carrying across the dunes. It was a sound of watchfulness, of quiet companionship in the stillness. He smiled faintly at it, a small curve that had not yet returned fully, but a curve nonetheless. He breathed again, slow and deliberate, feeling each heartbeat like a reminder that life continued, that grief could coexist with hope, and that the heart, though shadowed, was never entirely defeated. Rising, he began to descend the ridge, each step steady and certain. The night had not lifted his sorrow completely, but it had given him something perhaps more valuable, a sense that endurance itself was a kind of grace, that even in darkness the heart could prepare for the moment when light and smile might return together once more.